It was a tough time for me because I enjoyed the Griffith Show so.
He made the world laugh. But behind that nervous grin was a lifetime of fear, trauma, and secrets he never escaped. He battled panic, went blind, and in his final days, something even darker took hold. Was it illness? Or something else? Did Don Knotts simply die? Or was he killed by the very pain he hid so well? The truth is far more tragic than anyone ever knew. Don Knotts was born in Morgantown, West Virginia, in 1924. He was a surprise to his family, arriving 14 years after his next oldest sibling. His parents hadn't planned on having another child. They'd just lost their farm, and his father, Jesse, was struggling to support the family. Don slept on a cot in the kitchen. His older brothers bunked with strangers who rented rooms to keep the family afloat. The house was crowded, stressful, and joyless. He was small, constantly sick, and wore second-hand clothes. At school, kids laughed at him. At home, there was no escape. His father, nearly blind and mentally ill, drank heavily and could turn violent without warning. Sometimes, Jesse would press a knife to Don's throat and threaten to kill him. His mother later reminded him of it when he was an adult. Don once said, "I felt like a loser. I was unhappy most of the time." When his father died of pneumonia when Don was 13, the grief was real, but so was the relief. His 3 older brothers, raised during better times, grew bitter and angry. They drank, fought, and saw Don as weak and useless. One brother, Shadow, was different. He teased Don, but in a way that made him smile. When Shadow died from an asthma attack, Don lost the only person who had ever brought light into his world. With no one left to lean on, he turned inward. He invented imaginary friends and retreated into his mind. Then he discovered ventriloquism. At 15, he built a dummy named Danny and began performing at local churches and schools. It wasn't just a hobby, it was his escape. When people clapped, they weren't clapping for the dummy. They were clapping for him. At 19, during World War II, Don was drafted. He wasn't built for combat. He was too skinny, too anxious, so he was placed in a special unit meant to entertain the troops. He performed in a show called Stars and Gripes, traveling across the Pacific with his dummy. But after 2 years, something snapped. The laughter the dummy got started to bother him. One night on the ship back to the US, he picked it up and threw it into the ocean. He imagined it screaming as it sank, but he felt free. No more hiding behind wood and paint. From then on, Don would make people laugh as himself. He returned home in 1946 and went to West Virginia University on the GI Bill. There, he studied theater and met a woman named Catherine Metz. She was thoughtful and calm, the opposite of him. She was also engaged to someone else. But Don pursued her, and in 1948, they married. That same year, he graduated with a degree in theater and moved to New York City with just $100 in his pocket. His goal was simple: become an actor. But New York was harsh. He auditioned for radio shows, but directors didn't know what to do with a scrawny, nervous man from West Virginia. Bills piled up, confidence drained. But eventually, thanks to wartime connections, he found steady work. In 1953, he landed a dramatic role in a soap opera, Search for Tomorrow, playing Wilbur Peterson, a neurotic man who could only speak to his sister. Don pulled from his own life to bring that character to life. It wasn't easy, but it made casting directors take him seriously. By 1955, he was in a Broadway play called No Time for Sergeants, where he met Andy Griffith. They had instant chemistry. A few years later, in the film adaptation, they shared the screen again. That connection would define both their careers. Don continued to climb. He joined The Steve Allen Show in 1956, and audiences loved his quirky, anxious persona. One night, he had a dream about a man trembling so hard he spilled water all over himself. He turned that image into a sketch, and it became comedy gold. In 1960, everything changed. Don was watching TV and saw Andy Griffith play a small-town sheriff on The Danny Thomas Show. He immediately called him. "Don't you think Sheriff Andy Taylor should have a deputy?" he asked. Andy agreed. No audition, no contract, just trust and friendship. Thus began The Andy Griffith Show and the birth of Barney Fife, Don's most iconic role. At first, writers thought Don would play the straight man, with Andy getting the laughs. But during the second episode, Andy made a choice. Don would be the comic. Andy would support. Barney was loud, arrogant, insecure, and hilariously wrong about everything. He carried a single bullet in his shirt pocket because he wasn't trusted with a loaded gun. He bragged about judo and American history, but failed at everything. And yet, audiences adored him. Don poured himself into the role. He won 5 Emmys between 1961 and 1967, the most ever for a supporting actor in a comedy. But behind the scenes, he battled anxiety, hypochondria, and a growing dependence on pills to calm his nerves. He often thought he was dying, even when doctors told him otherwise. In 1965, Don left the show. He thought it would end after 5 seasons and signed a movie deal with Universal. But the show continued. Andy stayed. Don couldn't return. He was devastated. Still, his films found success. The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, The Reluctant Astronaut, and The Shakiest Gun in the West were hits, especially in small-town America. But when he tried to change his image in The Love God, playing a Hugh Hefner-style character, audiences rejected it. By 1971, Universal let him go. Hollywood was changing. Edgy dramas were in. Don's clean, slapstick humor seemed outdated. He worried people were tired of his nervous act. At 47, his film career was slowing down. Then came Three's Company in 1979. Don was cast as Ralph Furley, the eccentric landlord with outrageous suits and even louder confidence. At first, the cast was intimidated by his fame, but Don quickly became a favorite. His energy, facial expressions, and physical comedy were unmatched. But just as things were going well, tragedy struck. At 57, Don was diagnosed with macular degeneration. He began going blind, reading scripts, recognizing faces, even driving, all became difficult. His signature wide-eyed look was slipping away. He grew withdrawn and depressed. His wife Laura Lee tried to help, but he resisted therapy. The stress destroyed their marriage. Eventually, she left. In the early 2000s, Don was diagnosed with lung cancer. The irony was painful. He had quit smoking years earlier, but the damage was done. He kept it secret at first, afraid he'd lose work. Even then, when doctors confirmed the diagnosis, he cracked a joke. Laughter was always his armor. Despite failing health, he kept working. In 2005, he voiced Mayor Turkey Lurkey in Chicken Little, his first Disney role in decades. He also appeared on That 70s Show, parodying his earlier roles. His final performance came posthumously in Air Buddies, voicing a dog named Sniffer. Throughout those years, one friendship never faded: Andy Griffith. They had met in 1955, and despite career changes, they remained close. Andy visited Don one last time at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles before he passed. According to Don's family, Andy was the final visitor. On February 24, 2006, Don Knotts died at age 81. The cause was complications from pneumonia and lung cancer. He had spent a lifetime battling fear, doubt, and disease, but never stopped making people laugh. His funeral was private, but the public mourning was massive. Tributes poured in. A statue was later unveiled in his hometown. His face was added to the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His legacy was cemented not just as a comic genius, but as a man who turned pain into laughter. Don Knotts lived in fear, but gave the world nothing but joy. Behind every laugh was a man fighting silent battles. But to us, he'll always be a legend, a true master of comedy, and a heart that never stopped giving. If this story moved you, honor his legacy. Like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of the stars you thought you knew, but never truly did. Thanks for watching.